Oh, honestly unbalanced.
Notice that, like many people, to some degree, around the COVID period, you started to spend more time in the countryside. So you have the estate is in the family, and pre-COVID, you were there maybe like 1 day a week, perhaps, and then
Yeah.
you did the country move, as it were. Like, how I'd love to know how the adjustment has been in terms of leaving the big city, because you were in the center of it, weren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I was, as you know, Adam, I was there with you teaching at Tri-Yoga, 3 to 4, 5 times a week at Tri-Yoga Chelsea. And then pandemic hit, everything closed down. And because the historic house that we live in is open to the public, things were still closed down, but it's very much a business. So we moved, down there in order to try to run the business down here, whatever we could, because we still needed to bring in income. And yeah, sort of 3 years on from the pandemic, I guess, I spend most of my time down here at Mapperton. So before it was sort of one day a week, I was down in West Dorset, and now it's more like 4 or 5 days a week. And I'm only up in London, 2 to 3 days a week. So yeah, things have definitely changed massively for me since the pandemic.
What's your thoughts on kind of relationship with big city living? In that, anyone who is in the yoga world needs to hustle quite a lot, don't they? They need to work hard, running around the city, going from place to place, private to private. That might still happen on the few days a week you're in London, but do you miss that hustle, as it were? Do you miss the energy of London, or do you like that separation now?
Do you know, when I first started teaching, almost 20 years ago, I loved the hustle, and it was before social media. So I loved flyering for my church hall yoga classes here in Wandsworth. I loved, cycling to try yoga and, cycling to all my privates and auditioning for classes and, being on the tube and going from place to place. And so energy, of course, London has this real energy, but I still am able to get back here and, teach occasionally here and there. But I think for many of us after the pandemic, it was a time for us to sort of reflect on how much hustling we wanted to do. Maybe some people wanted to do more. I was definitely in the mind of thinking, gosh, this is quite nice, this lockdown for a bit of peace. And I think I felt I wanted to incorporate that in my life a little bit more. And so going back to a schedule where I was teaching almost every single day and privates here and there just wasn't on the cards anymore. I made that shift, and I'm really happy with it. Now, it's not this to say that I don't miss my Sunday night classes at Tri-Yoga, because that to me was like incredible energy. And, I'll see people and they're like, will you ever come back and teach your Sunday night class? And, the answer is always never say never. But for now, no, because I'm on a different path. I still have yoga. Yoga's at the heart of everything I do. But as you know, Adam, from yoga, we're able to find different paths that I think yoga has sort of led us to. And that's where I am right now, focusing on different sort of areas in my career.
Sticking with the beginning of your career for a while, like you said there that you're flying for your little town hall or church hall class. And I think when people look at anyone who is perceived to be successful, like any yoga teacher on social media that has a significant following, that is respected, that does big events, we often forget that there was a journey to getting there. They didn't just qualify as a teacher and then suddenly book to teach events, etc. There was a path. And of course, that path isn't particularly glamorous necessarily, and it's not talked about. And actually, for many people that younger teachers might admire, there's no evidence of it because social media didn't exist back then. No matter how far we scroll, we can't find evidence of it. So can you talk a little bit to that about how hard you had to work at the beginning to make yoga work for you and what your expectations were?
I do feel that I worked really hard. And remember, when I started in my yoga career, I had 4 young children. So I became a yoga teacher right after my number 4 child
Oh, wow.
was born. So, when I started sort of teaching, I had a 2-year-old. When I started to properly teach in church halls, I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And this is how it worked, everybody. I would drop off my children, and only 2 out of 4 went to the same school.
Oh,
So I would
no.
do one school run in the morning, come back, get on the bikes, do the other, and then take the youngest to nursery. And what I decided to do was, well, I don't think I can teach in a studio, because I couldn't really commit to that because I had children. So I thought, well, I'll be able to teach during term time, and I'll rent a church hall, 2 church halls near 2 of my kids' schools. And I went to TK Maxx. I got, inexpensive yoga mats, belts, blocks. I had 2 huge bags, and I would drop off all my kids, get to the church hall, and hope that people would come. Now, when I say hope would people come, this was before social media. I would, of course, put up flyers in the schools that my kids were at, but it was much more than that. Ask any of my 4 kids what they remember. One of the things that they remember about my yoga career was that I would pick them up from school at 3:30, and they would all have snacks, and they would go and flyer, and we would spend walking back from a run, and they would flyer in people's letter boxes, putting in that I had 2 church hall yoga sessions. And sometimes people didn't come. Sometimes I'd have one. Many times, Adam, nobody turned up. And I've been asked that before, like, well, what would you do? I would just do my own self-practice. Yeah, it was a real hit because I'm spending 20 pounds on the church hall, but I never gave up, because the second I wanted to give up, the next week I'd have 4 people coming. And it really started to grow. And I did this for a year and a half before I got a phone call one day. And I got a phone call from the Power Yoga Company in Fulham. And they said, somebody goes to your church hall classes and recommended you as a teacher. Would you like to come in and audition? And that is how I got into studios. Yeah.
I love that. I can't imagine a day where someone just phones you.
I know, right?
Rather than contact you via Twitter.
Yeah.
I love what you said there about actually teaching even though no one turns up. I think in this world, we want results instantly. We want results quickly. And I run a mentor program. And that's a big conversation I had on that mentor program with teachers, this idea that just book it out. You have to turn up. You have to be consistent. You can't run something for 4 weeks and think, oh, well, no one's coming, let's stop it. It takes so long to build awareness. And even if there's 7 people that love you, just by sheer coincidence, they might all have a dinner date with other people on that Thursday night. Or maybe actually chances are of those 7, 4 know each other. They could be doing something together. And it's just, you have to just stick with it. And that's my biggest advice for anyone, I guess in any industry, is be consistent and stick with it, even if on the face of it, it doesn't appear to be working. Because at some point, it just all comes together and it all kind of makes sense.
And I've been asked the same question, like how I say to everybody, give everything a year. So give it a year and then maybe take the time to reflect. But I always tell people, whatever you decide to do as far as your business or your yoga career, whatever it is, give it a year. So if you're going to rent a church hall, give it a year.
That makes, and that's hard. That's a financial investment and a time investment, but you need to do hard things.
Yeah. Well, if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. If you do what is easy, your life will be hard.
I like that. Do you think then yoga's helped you? Because I know your style of yoga is quite strong, quite dynamic. You've been inspired by like the Mark Khan, the Dharma Mitra styles of yoga. So it's quite hard, quite fast, lots of intense poses. And do you think the challenge that you found in that has helped you deal with then the challenges of life? Because my view is that is a big reason why we do yoga, to create artificial challenge, to prepare us for the stuff that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So do you think yoga's helped you in that sense?
Well, absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned before, I have 4 children, and, first of all, having one child there are ups and downs with that, whether it's waking up, for a week because your child is sick and you haven't had any sleep, or, you've got the stress of, whatever your child's, going through, whether that's exams or friendships, and, whether it's 1 or whether it's 4, I think being a mother, a father, or a caretaker of children presents its own challenges, and you have to, I think, create a lot of inner strength in order to be that parent, to be that caretaker, because it's difficult. And for me personally, I 100% will always say that, I feel that the reason that I've been able to, I think, raise my 4 children, decently, successfully, is all because of yoga. Because I was then able to be, I think, more empathetic and compassionate towards what my children were going through. I was able to offer them breathing exercises, even though they say they didn't like it. They actually are now older. They all like it. They all remember it. And so, even though they might have thought, well, you're crazy, Mom, these breathing exercises or these forward folds, now that they're older, they'll say, gosh, I'm so glad you actually did that. We still think you're crazy, but we like it that you taught us that. And for me, yoga gave me the tools to help raise my children in that compassionate, understanding, and I think empathetic way as a parent.
When you brought yoga into children's life, was it then via actually talking about philosophy with them, or was it more like doing forward folds with them, and then their way of being was just a byproduct of the asana?
When I started teaching yoga, as I said, they were quite young, 2, 4, 7, and 9. And so I couldn't necessarily bring in the yoga philosophy. Then I can now, definitely, as they're older. My youngest is now 16. But, a great example is when my youngest went to reception, and I remember him coming back after the first week of reception, and he just didn't have any friends. He couldn't find a friend, didn't have a friend, and he was in tears. And I put him in a forward, it was hysterical. And I put him in a forward fold. And so we went in a forward fold together, and we're talking to each other upside down. And, because remember, children will actually mimic what their parents will do. You don't have to necessarily say, hey, this forward fold's going to calm you down and bring blood flow to your head. They're not going to get that aged 4. But if you go into a forward fold and say, let's have a conversation this way. And I remember having a conversation with him about, you're going to find friends. Let's just breathe with me. And you kind of count, and they're not doing all the breath work with you, but they're trying sort of. And I said to him, do you know why I put you in a forward fold? Of course, I wasn't expecting, it was a rhetorical question. I wasn't expecting him to answer. And he said, no, I do. And I said, why? And you have to remember, he's in this state right now thinking about friendships, how he doesn't have any friends. And he said, it's because the upper body never gets to see the lower body, and they actually want to be best friends.
Oh, how cute.
I know. So
how old is he then? At 4, 5?
No, he was 4 when he said that. Yeah.
That's adorable.
So, for me, it's been instrumental in my parenting. Yoga has been instrumental. And it's not just because I'm a yoga teacher, it's because I practice yoga. It doesn't mean, when you practice yoga, you're being fed, and being taught by your teacher, of course, these breathing exercises, this yoga philosophy that you can translate and transfer into everyday life as a student and as a teacher.
It changes you, doesn't it? The long-term practice does change. Even if the style of yoga, the style of yoga might be overtly spiritual, it might be chanting or kirtan, but even I think if you just have a strong asana practice and you're dedicated and you fight your ego through it, it fundamentally mentally changes you over a 10-year period. And my wife and I always have this conversation. I'm probably tighter than I have been in many years, but my yoga practice is way more advanced than it's ever been. And things just come, and it's all is good. All is well.
Yeah.
Let's chat about then the change. No, actually, not the change in direction. Before we move into changing direction to what you're doing now, I would love to know the approach you had to time management. Because from what I can tell, at a point in which you were bringing up multiple children who all had great demands for you, you were writing books, you had a blog, you were, I guess, pioneering social media at a time when it was just emerging. You were teaching, I'm guessing, classes, teaching privates as well. And then I guess in the background there might have been some of the house stuff, etc. Like, what was your approach to like time management? I'm looking for tips. in a sense.
Yeah, and the other thing is we didn't have nannies. Lots of people will be like, oh yeah, no, I had help when they were much, much younger, when I needed it because I was working full time. So this is before my yoga career. And then, once the story goes is that, and it is the right story, I fell into yoga because I was working a full-time job for a post-production company, and my fourth was born, and I was in Chelsea, Westminster, and I had a huge, and I booked this meeting with Discovery Channel on October 17th because only 2% of births fall on their due date. So I thought, and I had 3 other children beforehand, and they were really easy births. I was very lucky. I know that. And so I thought, no, I'll book this big meeting on October 17th because either I would have had the baby beforehand and been fine, or I would have had it afterwards. Well, lo and behold, my youngest gets born at 12 minutes past 12 on October 17th. So I have a meeting at 9 a.m. I call everybody at 6 a.m. on October 17th saying, I've just had a baby. I'm in Chelsea, Westminster, but don't worry, I'm going to make it to the meeting. Okay. So, so my husband then had to call everybody and say, she's not making it to the meeting. She needs to do. So it was that point, Adam, that that week I did 2 meetings in Soho without even telling anybody I just had a baby. I took a taxi to Soho, breastfed my baby, took a taxi to Soho, came back. My baby was crying, put him back on my breast, fed him again. And everybody was like, you need to, he was 1 week old. Everybody was like, you need to take time off. So I decided to take a year off. And that is when I really found yoga. So fast forward to sort of answering your question, I then found yoga, became a yoga teacher. And I had been practicing yoga prior to that, but that's when I really sort of immersed myself into it and became a yoga teacher. And from that point, balancing it all and writing these books and teaching at Try Yoga and teaching privates and then doing the school run. And, more than I do that, or as well as I do, I should say, that, we survive as young parents off of little sleep. So I was writing my books, while I was breastfeeding. I was writing my books in the middle of the night, when a child was sort of next to me, sort of not really sleeping, and or in the middle of naps. I was teaching at times when they were at school. I was even teaching early morning privates at 6 a.m. before they even got up because my husband was here, so I knew somebody was in the house. And then I would even teach privates when they all went to bed, and I would do like an 8 o'clock private. And I hustled, I really, really hustled, but I made sure that my children came first. And then I was able, when I had the time and the lack of sleep that I had, I was able to slot in sort of the stuff that I wanted to do, my passion.
It's so hard, isn't it? Now, I think especially, we're so aware of what makes us healthy in the long term. We're so increasingly aware of the power of sleep, the importance of sleep, the importance of good diet, the importance of rest, perhaps more than we were 3 years ago. And so I think we're playing with this duality now, as we want to hustle. And I want to hustle. I could work all night. But at the same time, I'm thinking, but I want to make sure I live a long time for my baby. So I have to weigh up, do I want to burn bright and die early and be not being able to pick up any potential future grandchildren? Or do I want to look after myself and make enough money to survive, but be able to be with him at every moment and live a long time to see him live a long time? It's really hard, isn't it, to find that balance? And I think increasingly so, because we're so aware of costs.
We are, and we're so aware of cost. We're aware also of our mental, physical, emotional, energetic well-being much more now than we were, let's say, when I sort of started on this journey because of the power of social media. And what I always tell people is, do what's best for you. If you're people will say to me, Julie, are you practicing what you preach about not slowing down, but small moments of self-care or self-care? Because it seems like you're always on the go. And I say to people, but I do what's the best for me. So I do a yoga practice. As you mentioned, Mark Khan, he's been my teacher for years, and it is a hard practice, but I Love it. Yeah. For me, I mean, it's not that I don't do other yoga practices. I love Aram. And, so I will do, other yoga practices, but I always make sure that I slot in time for me, because that gives me the energy to be able to continue to do all these things. But everybody is different. So some people might need more of those moments of self-care and longer than, for me, how I am as a person. I am quite energized. I have a lot of energy. I can't sit still that long. But once I'm focused on a project, then I'm completely focused. So I think it's do what's right for you rather than what social media is telling you to, because there's a lot out there on social media, 5 tips to get better sleep, and I think that they're great. They're great. Don't get me wrong. I like them, but they will drop with the people who need to see them. And what I always tell people is that message on social media is great. It might not drop with you, but it's going to help other people. And that's okay. It's like a yoga teacher, Adam, you know this. I might not be the right yoga teacher for somebody, but you might be the right yoga teacher for somebody. That messaging might not be the right messaging for me, but it will land with somebody else.
And it will change through their life. They will go through like an Aram stage and an Adam stage and then a Bhakti stage and a like. And I think it's important. You mentioned the idea of practicing what you preach. For anyone who is a teacher, you can feel guilty if you don't practice what you preach all the time. And I don't think that should happen. I think, your life is going to be full of challenges. People will die around you. You might have financial issues. Lots of stuff could happen in your life, good and bad. Yeah. And you can't always practice everything you're trying to teach people to do. And it's okay to understand what is good for someone without implementing it yourself. So as an example, I know the best way for someone to work towards Hanumanasana. I don't practice Hanumanasana. I don't care for it that much. Right. But I understand it and I can apply it. I know the things that someone could do to optimize their sleep schedule. Well, one of those things would be not having a child. But I want a child, so I'm not going to optimize my sleep schedule in that sense. So I think we shouldn't feel guilty if we are teaching some things that we don't practice ourselves. As long as we believe in them and we're being vaguely authentic, and in yoga as well, we can all definitely practice the philosophy and preach it. Like what we don't want is yoga teachers that preach the philosophy and then are assholes. We can all practice that. But in terms of the things that take time, like asana or sleep schedule or diet, it's okay to deviate from those things, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly what you said. When yoga teachers sit there and talk about the ego, but then all of a sudden you meet them and you're like, they have the world's biggest ego. They're not practicing, really what they're preaching. And it's exactly what you said. I was teaching Pinchamayurasana before I even knew how to do Pinchamayurasana. That's because I was taught sort of in one sense how you can teach a bit of poses that maybe you don't like doing or you don't want to do, because we get that knowledge that's been passed down from other teachers, and we're just sharing the knowledge that we've been passed down, and sharing from Dharma Mitra or from Baron Baptiste or Jason Crandall, things like that being passed down. That's we're
and as an extension of that as well, not only can we teach things that we can't maybe do ourselves, but we can't imagine what it's like to be every human being. I can't imagine what it's like to be partially sighted. I can't imagine what it's like to be a 7-foot man. I can't imagine what it's like to be a 5-foot woman. But I can still teach all of those people because I understand concepts.
Yeah, exactly.
How have you kept yourself grounded in a sense? Because I think yoga teaching, of course, we're trying to dispel ego. But we can get like a guru complex, especially if you're a popular teacher and people really love your class. They can kind of like bow down to you, etc. And it can be, I say that as if people bow. No one's ever bowed down to me.
Yes, they have.
I'm not that. They don't even hug me. I've not got my default face isn't particularly huggy. But it can be easy to put yourself on a pedestal, or people put you on it, and then ego develops, and social media can make it worse. Then, of course, with yourself, you've had TV stuff, etc. You've been on numerous TV shows. How have you reined in ego when people around you might have wanted to build up your ego?
Do you know, I mean, I hand on heart can honestly say I've never had an ego, and I'll tell you why. I think, I like all of us, we've had, well, I think all of us, many of us have had some, quite difficult life experiences. My husband was ill for 7 years, and I think that can be quite grounding, and you appreciate then what you have. And so if it hadn't been for possibly that experience, and I think also for having 4 children, I probably could have had an ego. I think for me, going through an illness with your partner, and coming on the other side of that, navigating parenthood with 4 small children while your partner spouse is ill, it's very grounding. So that, to me, that's what did it. It wasn't tools that I put on board to ground me. It was, I have seen a whole other side of life and how life can be precious, temperamental, so incredibly difficult. And so that when you get to the point that you have worked, hard to bring those students to try yoga or, write a book. And for me, I didn't have any ego for any of that, because I always was grounded in that I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to experience this. I'm lucky to have this.
And do you have any kind of formal gratitude practice?
My formal gratitude practice, no. I think, again, and I know I keep using my 4 kids, I'm so grateful for my 4 kids every single day, and that my husband is here every single day. That, to me, that sort of encapsulates and that's every day. So yes, of course, I'm grateful that I have my cup of coffee and, or my green tea, but there's life affected me in such a profound way at a young age with young children, that I just wake up every single day and think, crikey, I am so grateful I have 4 healthy children and a healthy husband.
It's lovely. And I think that must be as well a lot of just your personality type and upbringing that allows you to do that naturally. I think a lot of people, that's not the case. And I think a little bit of a formal practice can really help. Like Holly and my wife and I are quite positive in many senses, but nonetheless, we try and engage. Even we used to do it before we go to sleep. Now we go to sleep within a minute. But at some point, we do try and occasionally just be like, 3 things you're grateful for today. Or even just between ourselves, just always saying, oh, I love our cottage. Oh, I love our son. I love the flowers. I love the pond, like mundane things. I think it's always important to acknowledge how far you've come. And I think a lot of us, especially in the self-employed industry, talking about work for a second, aren't necessarily that good at that. There is always a next thing. There's always a next thing to work on. And my wife often slaps me and says, Adam, look, you've got borderline 100,000 followers on Instagram. You're teaching 20 different big events this year. But I almost act like I'm a new teacher sometimes in terms of how much work I need to do.
Yeah. And I think it's because we've worked so hard to get to where we are that it's imprinted on us to continue to continue to work that hard. So yes, we're grateful for these events, and that, we've worked really hard to get to where we are in our yoga career, but it's hard to turn that off, to be like, okay, wait, I'm just grateful for where I am right now. But because we have it inside of us for years, we've been on this path of, go. And it's hard to sort of dial that down. But of course, it is good to dial that down. We need to be able to dial that down in order to smell the coffee, sit and smell the coffee.
There's two elements to what you're doing now. Beyond yoga, there is the TV stuff, etc., and there is also the property and the development of the property. Are you still with? Oh, you froze for a second there. The development of the property, etc. As kind of a random question to begin with regard to property. Like, I can see that actually you're getting your hands dirty and probably doing things that you've never done before in terms of like cutting bits out of windows and alike. Like, how have you found that process quite relaxing to get stuck in and actually not have a phone potentially with you and just hammer nails and alike?
Yeah, well, what it does is basically, I call myself now a qualified decorator. I mean, I can I can zinder, I can sand, I can patch, I can cut in, I can sand floors, I can everything. And I paint pretty well too. So as in paint walls and ceilings. So I think for me, it gives me an opportunity to, really switch off from the phone, from emails, because I'm in the middle of a big project and I have a deadline and I need to get it done. And I can't then be on my phone. I can't be on my emails, so it gives me a great excuse to put the out of office. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a renovation project. I'll see you next week. So that, but it's after the pandemic. Well, I think for many of us, well, all yoga teachers, we had that choice to go online, and most of us took that up. So online over the pandemic was fantastic for me. But at the same time, as we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I moved down to the country, and that's the first time that I really started to take on more responsibilities at our historic house. So I had sort of two career paths in parallel: teaching online, which was going really great, doing teacher training online. And then at the same time, I have this historic house. It's open to the public, and really getting my teeth sort of sunk into it. And after that, once we started to emerge out of the pandemic, I had a choice to make, and I had to make that choice. And that was difficult. The choice was, do I go back to life before the pandemic, teaching at Tri Yoga, teaching my privates, doing my, teacher training back in real person, in real life, or do I focus on this other opportunity? And that was much more of TV, historic houses, commentating on the royal family. And I don't know if I made the right decision. I think I have, but you always sort of, second guess yourself. But I decided that still to have yoga and still teach once a week online, but that's it. But continue, of course, my yoga journey with my teacher, Mark, and et cetera, and other teachers, but to really take on this challenge of preserving this historic house. And that's where I'm at right now. And and you can't look back. If you look back, then remember, the past is a memory, future's a fantasy, and you've got to be either nowhere or now here. And I choose to be now here.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure we're changing things up. I think the worst thing for the human soul is stagnation. And to imagine things would ever be as they were again. Like, nothing's come back to the same since COVID, as far as I'm concerned. Everything's different. Some good bits, some bad bits, but everything is fundamentally different. Tell us a little bit about the project in the house at the moment and a bit of the history. So the Earl of Sandwich is your husband's father.
Yeah.
And he lives on the estate still, but in a vicarage, from what I understand.
Yep.
I do some good stalking.
Well done.
Not in person.
Right. Yes, done.
And so what is the aim for the property? What's the long-term aim?
So we have the Mapperton is, since 2006, thank goodness, Country Life gave us the accolade Nation's Finest Manor House, and we'll use that.
Did they?
Yeah, we'll take that line to our grave. And because once you kind of get given the title of Nation's Finest Manor House, they can't go around the country and find another one. Right. So we're a historic house that was built in the Tudor period. And in 1540, the first part of the house was built. It's on a 2,000-acre estate. And if you were to drop a pin in the most remote part of West Dorset, or really Southwest England, you'd land on us, which is a blessing and a curse. A blessing because there isn't a car in sight. There's no airplanes. You're like, where even? It's beautiful. But a curse because, of course, in order to preserve this part of England's heritage, we need visitors. So we're not off a main road. We're our biggest city is an hour and a half away. So we're not near a metropolis. And so it's all about trying to get people to come as visitors and pay the visitor ticket and visit the Italianate gardens and the house. But I think for Luke and I, my husband, what we're now doing is really quite wonderful. Within the 2,000-acre estate, we have just started rewilding. So many of these sort of grand historic houses with land, sort of the landed gentry, they would have commercial pheasant shoots. We don't have that, and we are giving our land back to nature. So we have our White Park cattle, which is some of England's most ancient native species. They look like Texas Longhorns. We just brought in, and they will do fantastic grazing. We have Exmoor ponies who will do the browsing. We have Tamworth pigs who've just arrived who will do the rootling. And then we have a pair of beavers who will help. And all of this together helps to not only sequester carbon into the soil, but also helps to create more wetlands for the beavers, which will then create more biodiversity. And what we're looking to is to create more biodiversity and an abundance of biodiversity. And on top of within that project, we're starting to this year, maybe by the time this this conversation comes out, we will be one of the first country estates to have what's called social prescribing. So we will be working with the GPs in West Dorset. And so our aim is that before that GP sort of gives a prescription pharmaceutical drug, they will have that person, that patient will have an opportunity to come to Mapperton and do a six-week course on what we call social prescribing. And that might just be a walk in nature. It might be helping us build things on the estate. It might help in the gardening at the estate, so that and with other people, and so that they're immersed in nature before
what a wonderful idea.
Prescription of pharmaceutical drugs.
I didn't know that was the thing. I knew that doctors were increasingly kind of recommending, do some movement, get outside, but I didn't know it had been formalized. Is that just that local authority that are doing it, or is it nationwide?
So we will be probably the first big county, and I wouldn't say I can't say that I'm pioneering it, but I can tell you that my husband is. So my husband's been working in Parliament for the past 10 years on the misprescribing of pharmaceutical drugs. And within this, we've decided to take the estate in a new direction. And we feel that there's a real opportunity and need for people who are going through really difficult times, but yet perhaps maybe, taking a pharmaceutical drugs isn't quite there could be another way.
So I guess both in terms of even antidepressants for adults, but even for children, actually, there's probably so much misdiagnosis of ADHD and the like. Who's funding that? Is that from NHS, or is it an external body? Lots of it.
Well, I can't give too much away right now, but there will be a big announcement this summer. So people will hear about it very soon. What
a wonderful thing! I'm sure there'll be lots of people as well willing to donate their time.
Absolutely.
Like a fantastic idea. That's lovely. Beavers are key, aren't they? How do you acquire your beavers?
Oh, that took a long time. They're
native, but there's not many of them. That's correct, isn't there?
No, because they were all killed off. They were killed off for their glands, and farmers think that they're pests, and it's terrible. And they're not pests, and they're fantastic. They help with flooding. They create wetlands, which then brings in more biodiversity. I mean, beavers are, bring back the beaver. That's what we need to do, is bring back the beaver. So right now we have our beavers in an 8-acre enclosure. And they have 8 acres to move about, but the hope that they'll have kits. And then the hope is that, because we've had them for less than a year, the hope is that they can, in one sense, be released into the wild. Eventually, that's what will happen with England, that they will be released into the wild. So there's quite a few estates and places throughout England, but it has to be watched. And our beavers did come from Scotland. So, and it's really exciting.
That's so cool. Wolves aren't the next step, are they?
Well, we have a problem with deer, and as everybody knows, so we have an oversupply of deer, and so deer do need to be culled by us. Sadly, when I say us, the population, because the deer they're eating. There's so many of them that they're eating sort of the tree they're eating the tree seedlings, and they're in one sense kind of damaging growth within the environment. And of course, if you look at the food chain, the wolves were the ones that would sort of use deer would be their food and they'd be the predator, and we don't have them anymore. And if you look at Europe, if you look at Italy in particular, you know, they don't have a deer overpopulation crisis because they have the wolves. So you could bring back lynx as well.
From what I believe, there's a Scottish estate that's introduced wolves. Is that correct? Have you
Possibly.
I believe
Maybe.
I'm not going camping there, but I'm pretty sure that exists. And I guess the Scottish wildcat would have.
Yeah, well,
I
lynx.
don't know. But there's a Scottish wildcat as well, I believe. And it's from what I understand, that cat is almost extinct because it's breeding with like stray domestic cats. And it's renowned as one of the only animals that people have never been able to tame. Like a highly vicious, tabby-sized cat. And then I guess the next the final stage of what you're doing now is all the TV stuff. Like where did that come from? Because naturally, you know, you're so good on camera, and I've seen you doing bits and pieces. You're so good, so natural. Has that come from yoga? But then I say you've got a background in post-production. Were you also in front of the camera at that point?
No, you know, I think yoga, teaching in front of people, has given, you know, public speaking, you know, it's given us all sort of that boost of confidence to be able to public speak, and the confidence in, you know, in instructing, right? So you take what you're instructing to your students in class, and it has to be succinct, and it needs to be heard, and it needs to be, the sentences need to be put together the right way. You know what I mean by that? And I think I've just sort of transferred that over into what I'm doing now, which is much more around historic houses. I commentate for the royal family through various networks on both sides of the Atlantic, but in particular with Sky. And it's just, you know, I was lucky enough to marry into, maybe not, but I married into an aristocratic family. And so as an American, I have a little bit, I think, more insightful view on what it was like as an American marrying into, you know, sort of an aristocratic noble family. And so how that really started was Meghan Markle, American, married into the royal family, and a lot of the broadcasters wanted to get my insights into that. And it's really just sort of snowballed since then. And from that, and I'm doing a master's right now in country house studies. So that kind of combines together with sort of royal history and preserving these historic houses and British history as well. So it's just evolved from that, and I love it.
And do you have kind of a long-term aim with that?
Do I have a what?
Like a long-term aim, or is it just take the opportunities as they come and enjoy each moment?
No, I definitely have. So I started a YouTube channel we started 2 YouTube channels over the pandemic. One was about Mapperton and how we were running the estate in particular over the pandemic, and that's grown to 135,000 subscribers. Wow. And which is brilliant. And then I started another channel called American Viscountess, and that's when I visit historic houses across the UK and their homeowner and their owners. So like a living history, different from National Trust, because remember, National Trust homes, nobody lives in them anymore. And that has gone from strength to strength. And, you know, this year I'm filming at Berkeley Castle, Alpin Manor in the Cotswolds, Glum's Castle, where the Queen Mother grew up, in Scotland, Scone Palace, Newby Hall, Castle.
You frozen.
So,
oh, sorry, you completely froze there. So I'll edit this a little bit.
Has 100 on from me, really my main focus right now. Ooh.
Yeah, you froze a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me, but your camera's completely froze. Yeah, can you hear me? Hello, you there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It
Yeah,
just,
your camera froze, and then the voice went a little bit jittery. So
oh,
I'll
sorry.
just no problem. I just cut that bit out. So I think the last question you answered was kind of the next step for it. What I'll do in terms of cutting in, I'm trying to think of a clean way to cut in. What I'll ask you is, let me ask a final question. Not a final question, but
Yeah.
let me start off with a new question. So is there any way for people to kind of go to your estate and get involved with what you're doing in that on that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can look at mapperton.com, but we're always looking for volunteers, and that can be what we call our rewilding volunteers. We look for house tour volunteers. And again, same with the social prescribing. Once we launch that, we'll be looking for volunteers for that. So, it's a real community there, and the more people that can involved, I think the happier and better quality of life for all of us.
It will be. And then you've got two YouTube channels, both which are doing very well. Some TV bits and pieces. Would you like to have a bigger TV show? Because I know there is, I'm sure across the pond as well, but a massive passion for people to learn about this kind of stuff. And I know it also acts as really good kind of hangover TV as well. Remember there was a TV show about English castles that became like a cult hangover show that people loved. But would you love something on a bigger scale in the long term?
Well, I have to be honest with you, Adam. The YouTube channel is quite big, and I can't give too much away, but our content has just been licensed by a huge streaming company, and that's all I'll say about that. So
amazing. I've got you early.
Yeah, you did exactly.
And so as a next step then, what do you want people to know about stuff that you have going on? We've talked about the estate. What are the YouTube channel names, and where can people find you for yoga?
Yeah. So first of all, if you're interested in life on a country estate or how to preserve these English houses, and British houses, I should say, for the future, you can look at Mapperton Live on YouTube, and you can also look at American Viscountess on YouTube. So that's where I really, that's become my main social platform, even bigger than Instagram now. So I just always have people just go to YouTube, and I do YouTube shorts. But you can always find me on Instagram and TikTok as well, Julie Montagu. Yeah, I've succumbed to the TikTok. So there you go.
I still can't do it. A part of me is tempted to pay someone to do it on my behalf. I just can't I just don't want it on my phone. I'm scared.
No, just do anything I put on YouTube Shorts. I just put on my TikTok. It works. There you go.
And then yoga, you're doing something. Well, we're both doing Fameless Gallery in London. It's a remarkable space in Marble Arch. We're doing a few between us through the year. My wife's doing the sound stuff in my one. You've done one event so far. How has it gone?
So I did my second one just on Sunday. So I've done two. It's brilliant. Do you know what? For me, yeah, it works out so well because I have so big responsibility down in Dorset. I feel that I can't commit to a weekly schedule in real life. So teaching there, the odd month, once a month is perfect. And it's such an amazing immersive experience. You're surrounded by the masters and all of their masterpieces. And it's like you're in this fantastic sort of otherworld bubble, and it's brilliant. And then having all those bodies in the room, whatever it is, 75, it's just great, high energy. And I love it.
Yeah, so Marcus, so that's Fameless London. If any of you fancy joining us there. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, and is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Adam and Holly. And I can't listen to this, but anybody out there who I think life after the pandemic has been tricky for many people, and in particular now. And my sort of advice to when people ask me, gosh, I feel stuck, or I just don't know what to do, is is what I said earlier on. If you do what is easy, your life will be hard. If you do what is hard, your life will be easy. So follow what you want to do. And it might be hard and you might think that it's overcrowded or everybody's doing it. There's only one of you. So they're not doing what you're doing. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Honestly unbalanced.